they were singing that song, I started to see a picture of two women in history. One of them was Harriet Tubman, and the other was Irena Sendler. And I saw the way that was made in very dark circumstances, and I was like, God, why are you showing me these women right now? And Harriet Tubman, they called her Moses, because she was a slave who made it to freedom, and instead of staying in the freedom, she went back. And she freed thousands of people. And God gave her dreams of what places to avoid and where to go and where there were safe places, of who she would meet. And she followed that. And I can't imagine the courage it took to go down some of those paths where God made a way.
That's right.
Irena Sendler was a Polish nurse in World War II, and she saw what the Nazis were doing with the Jewish people, and so she would go in to these concentration camps, and she would convince parents to give them her children so that they could have a chance for safety, and she smuggled them out. They taught dogs to bark, to disguise the wailing of the babies that they had hidden under sometimes dead bodies. And she kept a list and buried this list in jars in her backyard of every child that she saved and who their parents were, so they could find them after the war. And she saved thousands of children. And I just feel God saying, like, I just call you to courage. Because I'm making a way.
Yes.
I'm making a way. I'm the light in the darkness.
Jesus.
But just feel him saying, like, please trust me enough to take that courageous step, to go through that path. It's not always going to be easy, but there is a way. There is a way. God, I pray that you would rise up that courage and that faith in us, God, that we would remember every single time that you've made a way. God, everything that was uncomfortable that we have had to walk through and navigate, but that you have made a way and that you have made us better, that you have worked it for our good. God, would we just have such a holy courage as we just try to navigate some of these circumstances that we're in. God, we just put our feet in this place right now and we say, I trust you.
Yes.
I trust that you have a way. And you know what? Seeing the whole journey might scare the crap out of me, so I probably don't want to see that. But could you just show us the next step? Could you show us what's on our plate to do next?
That's right.
God, let us take the next best step. God, would you just drop that in our hearts right now? Amen. That has nothing to do with what I'm speaking about today. That's for free. That's extra. Although I guess, I do want to talk about navigating some stuff. I don't know. I find lately a lot of times, this feels higher than normal, saying to Dean, like, I just don't know how to navigate this right now. I don't know, just feels hard. I just don't know really what I should do, how to navigate this. And there's a lot of options out there in life right now, is there not? Like there's just, I feel like more than any other time in history, we are bombarded with what is available. The million different paths we can take, okay? Let's take something silly. Like women's beauty. There is like 1,000 things every day that you can do. Make your skin better, make this better, do that better, okay? I like Pinterest. And, Pinterest said that if you want like a glowing face, really great skin, you need to remove any like discoloration from the sun on your face, you should use a turmeric mask. Okay, well, I had a little bit of like sun discoloration, and so I decided that, yeah, I'm gonna give it a try. Turmeric, a little bit of lemon juice. I'm gonna make a face mask out of that, see what it does. You know why it gets rid of discoloration? It turns you yellow. Okay, like really, really, really yellow. I'm not talking like jaundice yellow, because I've had jaundice before when we were in Mexico and I was like extremely dehydrated and my liver couldn't handle my allergy medication. Okay, I've turned yellow before naturally, but this yellow is a whole nother yellow. Like, I am now a very tall Oompa Loompa. It's very yellow. Or I took a package out of Kraft macaroni and cheese, and I rubbed that all over my face yellow. That's literally, guys, what it was looking like. And so as I'm like, as soon as I put it on, I was like, this was a bad idea. Like, don't believe the internet. So I'm scrubbing, and I'm like, soaps and oils and like Epsom salt. I'm just like, it's like straight up like abrasion now, trying to get this off. And Hannah is looking at me like, Mom, why would you do this? Like, is it gonna stay like that? And I'm like, I don't know. I actually think it might. I have now become Ross, and I am now an 8. All right, Sam's gonna put up a little thing there because, Ross goes, and I don't know if you can read it, I can't on that thing, but he's just like, I went to that spray tan place your mom recommended. Chandler was like, was that place the sun? That's what I was looking at. Like, I am a full-on Ross here. I am an 8. And, so I scrubbed and I scrubbed and I scrubbed, and finally I got most of it off. I just looked like I had a slight spray tan, and then my face was just red and raw, so I couldn't really tell. I was like, I'll figure it out later. But I share that anecdote in that we just need to learn that we shouldn't do everything just because we can. Okay? I should not listen to the internet when it says to use a spice that is used for dyeing fabric on my face. Okay? I think our culture really needs to learn this lesson of dealing with this pressure that we have to do it all, to be it all, and to constantly, we're just always dealing with that fear of missing out. And you know what, it even has like a little hip new acronym, FOMO. All right, if you're feeling FOMO, you're feeling the fear of missing out. Because it has this like little acronym, we think that FOMO is a new thing. Okay, it's probably Instagram's fault that we feel FOMO, all those beautiful houses and wild adventures that people are on Instagram. What's interesting though is that FOMO is the very first deception tactic of the enemy. First one. Right in the beginning, we have Adam and Eve in the garden, and life is good. They've got everything they need, every single need taken care of. They're walking one with God. And then that little serpent comes in. And it says in Genesis 3, verse 3, now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it or you will die. You will certainly not die, the serpent said to the woman. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some of it and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. And then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. So if you see what's happening here, the serpent is pesting. You're missing out. You're missing out. I know you have all this, but you're still missing out. And he's like, you got to eat that fruit. And she does. So she was the first person to ever have FOMO. And FOMO spreads like a virus. Okay? Adam was just running around the garden naked, naming stuff. He's probably having a pretty good time. But he jumped on that FOMO train lickety-split. He's like, oh, yeah, we are like missing out. And so he goes on to eat the fruit as well. And then the rest is history. And you know what? The enemy is using the same thing ever since. That constant pressure that we are missing out on something. It's a really tricky one because it entices you to go after things that are good. Like, have you ever felt FOMO about cleaning out a pig pen? No, I am like happy to leave that to somebody else. It's not like cleaning up somebody's dog poop in the backyard. I do not feel like I am missing out. I have no fear of missing out on that. Where FOMO gets us is the good things, the opportunities, the skill building, the fun times with friends, the travel, the seeing things, the new countertops, the paint in your bedroom, the excelling, the success, the business opportunities. It's even the fear of missing out on helping people, of fulfilling a purpose, of being there for people when they need you. And then that constant fear that if we don't do it, who will? And I think what I'm learning is the best way to overcome deception is to expose it. Call it for what it is. Let's shine some light on it. And that's what I want to do this morning is I want to spend a whole bunch of time, not too much time, shedding light on that fear of missing out and how it is deceiving us in really practical ways in our lives. FOMO is a mixed cocktail of general anxiety and envy. That's what it is. We're anxious and we're envious. The thing is, though, it is always a losing game. You're always missing out on something, literally all the time. Right now, you're missing out. You chose to be here. Thank you. It's minus 40. It's a lot more fun talking to a room full of people than nobody, okay? But you could be at home in your pajamas with fuzzy socks drinking coffee, and that would be lovely. Okay? Or maybe you're watching this later online, and you did stay home because it was minus 40 and you wanted to hang out in your pajamas, and I hope your coffee is delicious. Okay? But either way, you are missing out. Now, it's a very first world mentality to think that we can do all the things and be all the things. We can't. That's not real life. I heard it once said that North America is the spoiled brat of the universe. It's a little true, right? Like, we kind of think we deserve everything. A lot of the world doesn't have this same situation. We think we can have it all, we can do it all, we can buy the bigger house, plus we can go on vacation all the time, plus we can have this. It's just not real life. And the sooner we come to grips with that that's just an illusion, the more healthier we'll be. I read a quote recently that I thought was interesting. Just remember that all that clutter used to be money, and all that money used to be time. I think that's a really good one for when we are, if we get stuck in that, wanting more stuff. Okay? I remember when I, worked my first job in the Hepburn Co-op for $8 an hour, a pair of $30 jeans, that was a whole Wednesday night that I had to miss youth for. Okay? So we start to see things differently. I know as a parent, it can feel extremely difficult and overwhelming to navigate this fear of missing out, because not only am I responsible for myself, now I'm responsible for these people, and I don't want them to miss out. Okay? And I know that maybe, sometimes some of the stuff that I want to talk about in the next couple minutes may not sound super spiritual, but I think it is. And so I know everyone's not in a parenting season right now, but if you can indulge me, I want to just give a little food for thought. Okay? We think that people are going to miss out if we're not everything. So not only do we think we're going to miss out, but we're scared now that everybody else that we love is going to miss out if we're not everything. There's, a meme that talks about okay, as a mom, you gotta clean the house, get up early, work out, cook healthy meals, spend time with our kids, read books to your kids. Okay, get outside, drink 8 glasses of water, work, have hobbies, help with homework, be a great spouse, volunteer for your kids' stuff, volunteer at church, have friends, do fun things, keep a clean house. Who has time for all of that? Hey, nobody has time for all of that. And dads, that was a list about moms, but lots of that applies to dads too, and other things. I got to fix the car, I got to keep this, I got to put gas in the cars because your wife just always runs it till empty. I just can't do all the things, Dean. Okay, so we don't want to get, we got to think about what the enemy's tactic is here. Because if he can keep us constantly in this fear of missing out and constantly pushing ourselves to our limits, well then it's destructive. It's a really destructive force in our life. Now, we all want the best for our kids, okay? And I think it's just natural human tendency that we want more for our kids than what we had, right? So we just keep upping the standard of living through the generations. That's normal, okay? I think FOMO looks like citywide registration, right? Have you been to citywide registration? It is chaos. Swimming lessons are like filled up for like 5 months in 3 minutes. Everybody wants to like get their kid in everything. It's this constant pressure that we face, and it's exhausting. Okay? It's interesting when we start to research some of these things because, a lot of times with FOMO, it's like, oh, well, what's your kid in this year for this and this and this? And it's like, and you're like, I gotta get my kid in stuff. And so we just kind of like run ahead with the pack. But when we start like looking at some of these things, well, one thing I found interesting, I like studying education, big surprise there, right? But the tendency in North America is to keep putting our kids into school earlier and earlier and earlier, right? Like, there's like pre-K and play school for 2 and 3-year-olds. Okay, now there's a lot of studies been done on kind of like the perfect age to like start a kid in school. And here's what the research shows is that because why do we start them early? Well, we want to give them a leg up, right? We want to give them that advantage. But when you take kids who have started at 2, 3, 4, and 5, and kids who started at 7, and you measure where they're at in a few years, there's no difference. In fact, the only difference there is that in a lot of kids who started earlier, they're actually further behind than the 7-year-olds. Finland, they all start at 7. If you want to research interesting education, the Scandinavian countries are very interesting with their education. Okay, the role of play is so, so important, and yet we keep trying to take kids out of play and put them into structured environments, and that actually does a lot of damage to them. And before you think I'm just going all like hippie homeschool mom on you, okay, I know, it's a real threat, but I started formally educating my kids at like 4 and 4.5, okay? So I'm not one that, delayed education until they were 7. I wish that I had. I honestly do. I wish that I had preserved their childhood more, and I'm really trying to do that now. Okay? Another interesting part is we have kind of like a North American obesity epidemic in youth, but it also correlates with a time in history when there are the most organized sports for kids than there ever has been in all of history. Same time, obesity epidemic, the most sports ever. Kids are in the most sports ever that they've ever been, and yet we have this issue. Okay, I just think that's interesting. Most would say that it's because that kids play a lot less. They have less free, unstructured time to just play and be active. They're just always going from one thing to the next. There was a book I read recently called Simplicity Parenting. Excellent read, I recommend it if you have kids that you're still parenting. Well, I'm sure it never stops, but. So the author took 35 children who were diagnosed ADD and ADHD, and he helped their parents put them on a simplicity protocol, like it was a prescription. And what they had to do is they had to simplify these kids' lives. Less organized activities, more free time, more time outside, less to no homework, simple meals, less food choices, and way less toys. They got rid of like 98% of their toys. The result is that 68% of the children were no longer classified ADD or ADHD after just 4 months. 4 months of simplifying their lives brought about that kind of a change. I think when we look at stuff like that, it's easy to see how the enemy is really just twisting and pressuring things so that we are, in essence, just like really giving ourselves a disadvantage, right? Another thing that FOMO does is it eats up your margins. Think of a piece of paper, and on the side you have margins, okay? We try not to write right to the end of the page, right? Because everything gets smushed and then you do that and you fall off the page. Now, where are the margins in your life? Do you have them? Are you budgeting your life? Is all of your time eaten up? Do you have room for things that come up? Because I have learned the hard way for sure that when I live my life to the margins, I'm just like eating up all of my time, that when something unexpected comes up, it knocks me out. Because I have no buffer. I have no room for anything unexpected to come up in my life. Okay? Your finances need margins. We cannot live constantly to the amount of money that we make all the time, because again, if something unexpected comes up, you might be fine for a few months, but something unexpected is going to come up, and then it eats up we have no margin, and then we're in a tough situation. Okay? Dr. Carolyn Leaf says, just because you can doesn't mean you should. We don't build up mental and emotional stamina by enduring or pushing our limits all of the time. We build stamina and resilience through rest. Sabbath creates margins in our lives. Sabbath is what God has called us to put aside time to rest and to rejuvenate. It's so serious to him that he took Sabbath. He rested. And I think we could preach 1,000 sermons on Sabbath alone, and I'm not going to try and cover it all here, but it's in the 10 Commandments. Keep the Sabbath holy, right? Take that time for rest. We often, I feel like, are just like, God, I don't really feel like I need to. I don't need to rest. Okay? And, I think it's really helpful, just as a quick aside, to look at the 10 Commandments not as like this list of stodgy rules. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. But it is a guide for avoiding foundational destructive behavior. Everything on that list is just destructive behavior. Okay? And so when we can avoid that, it's a good thing. FOMO is like a direct attack on the Sabbath. Another thing that FOMO does is it breeds discontentment, right? It's not long before the pursuit of not missing out on anything is going to collide with the reality that you just cannot do it all. And then that makes us feel lost, and it makes us feel envy. And wouldn't you know it, that envy is also in the 10 Commandments. Destructive behavior. Social media, we feel like makes it pretty hard, right? Everybody's beautiful house, their perfectly behaved children, their lovely arts and crafts, I know it's a little bit ironic because I am like very active on social media, okay? But we need to understand that social media is just a tool. Social media is not inherently good or bad. Okay, sure, I have said before Facebook is of the devil, but it's not true. It's just a tool, and it just depends on how we use it. And if we are finding that viewing social media and not understanding that like people aren't going to post their very worst day and things like that, we need to manage our appetite and we need to manage our use. And so if Instagram and Facebook bring up FOMO in you, then it's our responsibility to limit our exposure to it. Okay? It's not a bad thing. We just need to limit our exposure to it. The fear of missing out erodes our trust, because when we're operating in fear, we start to take more things onto our own plates and into our own hands. okay? It requires trust to be able to miss out on things. But if we're running around trying to meet all of our own needs all the time, we are not trusting God to meet our needs. If we are just filling ourselves with stuff and activity and meeting people's needs. We're also not trusting God to meet somebody else's need if we are saying yes to things when we don't have the space or margin in our life to say yes to things. Okay? I have had to tell people, I'm sorry, I can't actually help you work through this right now. And it guts me. But I know that I just can't handle it right now, that I have no extra space in my life, that I do not have anything left to give at this point without completely burning myself out. But a lot of times we can get sucked into just like trying to meet everybody's needs because we just believe that if I don't, nobody else will. Does that sound like trusting? Because it's not. Even with our own kids, I can run myself ragged trying to meet all of their needs, and God has to just like pull back the reins and be like, whose kids are these? Can you trust me to meet their needs without driving yourself into the ground? And that's really hard to do. That fear tempts us also to operate outside of our lane. Okay? I think we all have like somewhat of a lane. Sure, we jump lanes and stuff like that, but we have things in our life that we're called to do, that we're moving towards. David is a good example of somebody operating outside of his lane. Okay, we have King David in the Bible, and his lane was to be on the front lines with his mighty men, taking territory, winning battles. But he had a little bit of FOMO about a relationship that he was never supposed to have. Wasn't his to have, shouldn't have been in that relationship, and yet he stayed home off the front lines, and it's not PG, so I won't get into it, but he operated outside of his lane, and he just caused a ton of destruction in people's lives, including his own. Brought a lot of consequences into his family. Okay? Fear of missing out causes us to operate outside of our lane. And so it's a good idea for us to kind of figure out what our lane is. And you know what? Just leave some things for other people to do. Another classic example of the fear of missing out in the Bible is the prodigal son. Right? We have a wealthy man with 2 sons, and one of his kids decides that, hey, I want my inheritance now. I want it while I'm young and healthy, and I want to go out and I want to do whatever I want. And so he demanded that inheritance from his father, and his father gave it to him, and he went out and he lived it up. He decided that what he had wasn't good enough, that he wanted what was out there. And so he went for it and blew it all, realized that life wasn't actually so great, doing whatever he wanted, spending his inheritance. And so then he had to humble himself and come back to his father. And his father is a picture of God and welcomed him with open arms and threw him a party and a feast. Okay? And God's like that with us. It can take humility sometimes for us to come back to God and be like, look, I really shouldn't have been like chasing all of this stuff. Okay, so we can humble ourselves and come back to the Father, and we can open our own eyes, ask God to open our eyes to what we have. Because that's a really big, important part of guarding ourselves against that fear of missing out, is understanding what we have. Because everything is an exchange. You're always missing out. And so if we're intentional and we understand what we have, we are less likely to give it up just because something fancy comes along. I think one of the ways that plays out is through cultivating a life of gratitude. Okay? Seeing what we have, looking around at what we have and what we're doing, the choices that we're making, and having so much gratitude for this life that we have. I think it also boils down to intentional living and intentional choices. Like I said, not getting caught going ahead with the pack. I mean, recently we got like this letter in the mail, and it said Calgary Police, and I was like, shoot. I'm like, don't be a ticket, don't be a ticket. And so, in it was a photo radar speeding ticket. We were pulling a 30-foot trailer. We were not trying to speed, okay? We were just going with the flow of traffic. And if you know, honestly, Dean and I, neither of us actually speed. That's just not something we do. So we actually weren't trying to speed. We were just literally didn't really pay attention. And this is just what speed everybody's going. So we just drove that speed, and it was apparently we were going 90 in a 70 zone because everybody else was going 90 in a 70 zone, and it cost us $180. Okay, so we need to be intentional. We need to look around at the signs. We need to not just go with the flow. Okay? When we take ownership and we define our yeses, it's so much easier to say no to other things. Your yeses are the things that you are committed to, that are your priorities. And so when a really great opportunity comes up, but it's in conflict with your yes, well, it's easy to say no. Okay? Dean has turned down tons of jobs because they didn't work with our yeses of being home every night. We both grew up in families where our dads were gone for a minimum, usually 3 weeks at a time. And we just didn't want to do that. It doesn't work for us. It could work fine for other people, but that was just one of our yeses, was he'd be home. Especially if I'm homeschooling, I cannot single parent for 3 weeks at a time, okay? So that was one of our yeses. It's far easier for us to not go out to eat, to not say yes to big, expensive activities, shop a whole bunch when we know that we're trying to fit in 2 months of travel into our year. Okay? Every spare penny pretty much goes to that. And so, yeah, it's a sacrifice, but our yes is we want to travel. So we'll just make it work by giving up other things. So that fear of missing out is a deception. You're always missing out. I'm not trying to say that to just be like, wah, 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 Debbie Downer, okay? It's to just so that we can expose it and we can take that element of fear out of it. If we know that we're always missing out, well, then we shouldn't really be afraid of missing out because we just recognize that's just how life is. And so we can remove that fear and we can start to live out JOMO, the joy of missing out. We can have, yeah, all right. We can have joy knowing that we have been intentional with our choices, and we can bless those who that is their choice. Because, again, none of this stuff is bad. It's all good. It's good stuff. But we can have joy, and we can not be envious, and we can just be confident in the choices that we're making, that we are intentionally shaping this life that we get to live. And you know what? It's going to look countercultural sometime, but you know what? That's just what we're called to. Jesus was very countercultural. Okay, so we're just called to that, and we can create this space and this culture where it's okay to not do everything, that we don't buy into that illusion of having to be it all and having to do it all. We can live lives of contentment and trust and gratitude, where we're trusting the Lord to meet our needs. We're trusting Him to meet our kids' needs, even if we're not putting them in every single thing, that they're going to be okay. They're still going to make friends. Worship team, you can come up. I think as we move towards this, we can move towards keeping the Sabbath holy. That we can learn to live lives where we rest, where we have margins, where we're budgeting. I know none of those things sound fun. They sound like accounting. Okay. But it's really, really wonderful to live within your means. I had a conversation with somebody the one day, and they had the opinion that denying ourselves buying all the new things and, having all the toys and upgrading the house and all those types of things, that we were just like denying ourselves, and that our life was like lacking because of it. And I just said, I'm like, I don't think you understand like the freedom and the joy that comes from living within your means. When you're not stressed living paycheck to paycheck, when you're not stressed knowing you're like trying to like cook supper and do homework and, file your taxes all at the same time. When we create that space in our life, there's a lot of joy that comes from living within our means and from taking account and understanding what we have to give. I just want to read, just to close, this section of verses from Isaiah 58 about the Sabbath. Just as some little food for thought, something you can look up when you get home, maybe meditate on it this week. Isaiah 58, starting in verse 13. If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's holy day honorable, and if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in the Lord. And I will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights of the land, and to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. That does not sound like lack to me.